Hello and welcome to the regular Friday evening webcast from LaRouchePAC.com. Today is May 3rd, 2013. I'm Matthew Ogden, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our regular broadcast tonight. I'm joined in the studio by Jason Ross and Leandra Bernstein, and we have Mr. Lyndon LaRouche hooked in over video hookup from his current location in Europe. This broadcast is happening on the eve of a nationwide week of action, which has been called by LaRouche for the restoration of Glass-Steagall, which will be beginning next Monday, May 6th. Available on the website is the call to action, which has been published and has gone out widely. So this is a momentous moment for a discussion with Mr. LaRouche. He has requested that we begin with a question which has come in from institutional circles in the United States, and I would like to ask Jason Ross to come to the podium to pose the first question.
Hi there, Lynn. So here's the question for you. Next week, the House Committee on Government Reform will be holding hearings on the 9/11-12 Benghazi attacks. And for the first time, eyewitnesses from the State Department and the CIA are scheduled to testify themselves. These witnesses have hired outside attorneys because they've come under threat from the Obama administration. A news column today suggests that if these whistleblowers do indeed testify, that this will put the Obama administration in, quote, mortal jeopardy. According to one of the attorneys representing the whistleblowers, Benghazigate is much worse than Watergate. You, Mr. LaRouche, have charged that Obama has committed impeachable crimes, from his continuation of the Bush cover-up of the original 9/11 attacks, to his illegal war in Libya, to his cover-up of what actually happened in Benghazi on September 11th, 2012. Do you believe that these upcoming hearings can indeed lead to President Obama's near-term removal from office?
If we use the law and use fact and law, yes. The danger is that the opposition would be activated to do illegal actions, to suppress and deny the actions which are lawful actions and which are highly required right now.
Well, I would like to ask Jason to come back to the podium to ask a follow-up question along these lines. The situation currently inside Washington is quite tense. Not only do you have a revolt ongoing from inside President Obama's base, which has been continuing over the recent 2 weeks because of his announcement of vicious budget cuts in his 2014 budget, the chained CPI, cuts to Social Security and Medicare, and we have been getting indications from the streets around the United States that even the core of Obama's base is beginning to turn their back on him. This is obviously catalyzed by the leadership that the LaRouche PAC has posed since the beginning of Obama's first term, and most especially since the most recent presidential elections. Also, inside Washington, a total showdown is ongoing around the fight about whether or not the Obama administration should be allowed to intervene militarily in the conflict in Syria. We know that as of now, the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff continue to hold firm against this military intervention, but the clock is ticking. So I would like to ask Jason to ask a follow-up question along these lines as regards the situation around Saudi Arabia, the arming of the rebels in Syria, and so forth.
All right, well, as you know, people in the administration, some loony other government officials like John McCain, who seems to have lost his marbles, have spoken about the red line being crossed in Syria, saying that Assad's forces have used chemical weapons, that if we don't stand firm against these sort of things, further red lines will be crossed in the future, and that the time has come for military intervention in order to help the people of Syria who in their desperate plight. Now, This is opposed actively by Dempsey, by the military, by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who warn that there is no military option in Syria. There's obviously, from a legal standpoint, no military option in Syria without the support of the U.S. Congress anyway. But the situation on the ground is one where there's really nothing to do except for continue to arm rebel groups. And we've seen how well that worked in Libya. Right now in Libya, there's pressure on the General National Congress to pass the so-called political isolation law, which would take anybody who at any point in the past 30 years worked with the Gaddafi government and bar them from a government position for 10 years. Now, that would remove the president, the prime minister, 1/3 of the Congress, almost all of the judges and other judicial officers. This would basically be a coup d'etat in favor of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which is, people we've armed, rebels, terrorists related to Al-Qaeda. 2 months ago, on March 5th, 500 or more armed demonstrators held 26 members of Congress hostage, demanding that they pass this law. There's also plans afoot to split up Iraq, to split off a Sunni section and annex it to Jordan. This is also being supported by Saudi Arabia and by Qatar. So let me come to this is funny in a not so funny way. This year, 2013, is the 150th anniversary of the U.S. Emancipation Proclamation, which the Saudis are celebrating in their own way. 2 domestic workers from the Philippines were recently rescued from a mansion owned by the Saudi armed forces, who had taken their passports, were forcing them to work without pay, subjecting them to other forms of abuse. These workers were recently rescued from a mansion in McLean, Virginia. So these workers rescued from the monarchy's armed forces. So it gives you a sense of what kind of democracy you have there. But look, what I'd like your analysis on is the situation around the push mainly from Britain and then the Obama administration to get a war going in Syria, and then the opportunity for the military and other forces to resist. What's your analysis of this situation?
Well, the first thing you have to take account of is the fact that Europe, Western and Central Europe in particular, do not have the quality of government which we have in the United States, even when we are relatively at our worst in the past. And that's the key point. First of all, in Western and Central Europe, there is no real system of government. That has broken down. You have a euro system in most of Europe. You have Spain is starving to death. Other states are in the similar kind of condition, and there is no government in Western and Central Europe which has shown itself capable of even beginning to address the problems which are about to crush Western and Central Europe in particular. Also, we have the Saudi problem, which in the Saudis and the British government, the British Empire, are both highly guilty of crimes against humanity, namely, say, 9/11, for example, which was a crime committed by the British in coordination with the Saudi kingdom. And they committed a crime against the United States, a crime of mass murder, which 2 presidencies in particular of the United States have acted to cover up and conceal, including the current president. They have all acted to cover up mass murders, crimes against humanity, for which any government is liable to be called to account for crimes against humanity. That's our problem. We in the United States are showing, again, the ultimate superiority of our system of government over those of Western and Central Europe, for example, and other places. Because we are still, despite the things that have happened, despite the fact that we have 2 presidents who weren't fit for anything, one incumbent and the other one the president, despite that, we are showing our stuff. And that's the way you have to look at this. And our job is to make sure that we do what we have to do to encourage our citizens to think clearly and to act promptly and effectively. And I see signs of the willingness and promptness of many of our citizens increasingly to do exactly that. Again, the United States, which was created actually out of a process launched by some friends in Europe, ancient Europe, or not ancient Europe, but Middle Europe, and we have shown our stuff, and I think we're going to do it again. But there are problems, there are risks, there are challenges, but compared to the complete collapse of any accountability in the actual governments, the current governments of Western and Central Europe, the American people are a hero already, by comparison.
Well, I'd like to follow up your answer to that previous question by first elaborating a little bit more of the situation in Europe today. And as our LaRouche PAC activists who were on the Thursday night national activist call already heard, Dennis Small has pulled together a very stunning presentation which he has titled "The British Empire's New Concentration Camps." And this presentation focuses, as people will view the graphics currently on the front page of the website, what this features is the outstanding accelerated rate of unemployment, and especially youth unemployment, throughout Europe, as well as the rise in real youth unemployment in the United States. And I think it's significant that at a House Foreign Affairs subcommittee hearing at the end of last week, and it was a hearing on the rise of Islamic extremism. One of the panelists in this committee hearing was asked, "What is the number one predictor of extremism in a nation?" And the panelists testifying answered, the number one predictor is youth unemployment. And so, as Dennis Small presented in this graphic presentation, and we'll have a more thorough presentation available on the LaRouche PAC website shortly, the number of nations in Europe with youth unemployment of 20% or greater grew from 6 in 2008 when the crisis began to 19 as of today. In the United States in 2008, there were 3 states that had youth unemployment of over 30%. Today, that number has increased by an order of magnitude. 30 states in the United States have real youth unemployment of 30% or above. Now, this is, as we presented, this is economic genocide, and we're seeing it ongoing in Europe. In Cyprus, there's actually a forecast from the Troika forecasting an economic shrinkage of 60%, approximately 60% in Cyprus by 2015. And these are the projected effects of a policy being imposed by the Troika. Recently on the website, earlier this week, we conducted an interview with Professor Francis Boyle of the University of Illinois, who argued the case that the famine in Ireland was genocide on the part of the British Empire, that there was a genocidal intent, whereas the British during that time simply argued it was the effect of laissez-faire economic policies somehow gone awry. But we have projected effects of the policy. In Greece, the UN Human Rights Commission recently completed its investigation of human rights violations being carried out in Greece as a result of the implementation of the austerity policy and the bailout policy. And they are, for all intents and purposes, concluding, I can just read from parts of the press release from the United Nations, that the prospects of a significant number of Greeks securing an adequate standard of living in line with international human rights standards have been compromised by bailout conditions imposed by Greece's international lenders, according to the United Nations independent expert on foreign debt and human rights. So that is taking place right now. These are provable violations of human rights. Now, this is taking... I'll continue to elaborate and then get to the question. But we recently even had statements from the new Pope Francis saying that unemployment is a sin, that creating jobs is the equivalent of caring for the dignity of the person, and creating jobs is in line with the ability of man, given to man by God, to create. But you really don't need a theological argument. Mario Draghi, head of the ECB, announced rate cuts, a revival of the asset-backed security market, on the same day that the Federal Open Market Committee announced that any plans that they had previously stated to scale back quantitative easing were an utter lie. So you have austerity, quantitative easing or hyperinflation, unemployment, and what this policy amounts to is genocide right under our noses. So my question to you is, how do you prove the intent? And on top of proving the intent, how then do you go about preventing this kind of genocide in the present and then in the future, so that we can say about the present era, never again?
Well, you can say that very clearly, that Adolf Hitler was a simpleton compared to the Queen of England. She has, in the course of, since the effort to get their program through Denmark earlier and the failure then, she became quite more explicit on this thing. She states that her intention, the intention of her government and of her, is to reduce the human population rapidly from a present level estimated of 7 billion persons to a reduction of nearly 1 billion persons. Not only has that threat been made, but the threat is being delivered. The action is being delivered. This is being delivered in the starvation, which is spreading throughout Europe, is also happening inside the United States. Take, for example, on the Queen's own policy. In our food growing area, the great food growing areas of the United States, we find we have a collapse of food supplies, which is not going to be curable and is not tolerable in any degree, because we have taken no steps to prevent that. So the intention of the British monarchy is to reduce the world's population by means such as starvation and similar means. And the intention is to reduce the world's population from 7 billion people to approximately converging on a level of 1 billion persons. So with the policies of the British, and remember the European system is under the British control. The entirety of the European system, of the Western European and Central Europe, is now under genocidal control. And policies which lead in practice to intention. You must then compare the fact that this is the manifest intention of practice under the Euro system, and in Britain in part two, and in the United States. And this is the policy of the current president of the United States as well, who is nothing but a British stooge. He's British created, British controlled, British dominated, and a British admiring. And therefore we are now have a process worldwide of a scale of genocide which has never been known in historical periods of time. The greatest genocide in known historical times is now in progress under the direction of the British monarchy, the Queen herself explicitly, and also Barack Obama, who is essentially nothing but a stooge for the British monarchy.
All right, well, given your location, I would like to follow up with another question about Europe. And recently, this week, we've received a number of appeals from Europe calling on the United States, the people of the United States, to mobilize, and the U.S. Congress to pass the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. We recently received a call from the head of the Lega Nord caucus in Italy, a letter directly to the two main sponsors of H.R. 129, congratulating Walter Jones and Marcy Kaptur for having the bill introduced into the federal legislature, and stating that they have followed very closely the work being done in the United States on passing Glass-Steagall back into law. And it's signed, trusting that your bill will be soon approved by Congress and also introduced in the U.S. Senate. We shall keep you informed of the progress of our own legislative proposal in Italy, where Lega Nord recently had a companion bill, essentially companion to the American bill, to reintroduce Glass-Steagall bank separation in Italy. We also received a very urgent call from a city council person in Germany, requesting that for the sake of Europe, the United States reinstate Glass-Steagall. There's also a letter being passed around in Spain, urging the Congress to pass Glass-Steagall, saying that the economic and financial crisis that Spain is suffering and in Europe of the euro is reaching intolerable limits for our population. Going on to elaborate on the unemployment, the austerity, the loss of hope in a nation that has young people who had the potential to be the best educated in the history of the nation. So with these calls, additional other calls are coming in from Greece, from Cyprus as well. But with these calls, I would like you to elaborate more for, in particular, our American viewing audience, what exactly this fundamental difference is between our system in the United States and the European system.
Well, the European system, of course, is complicated. It does admit of very precise differences in policy. Largely, for example, you had a period in German history under Bismarck in which the policies of Bismarck's administration in the post-World War or post-Civil War period, U.S. Civil War period, in which he actually emulated on every basis what the Benjamin Franklin and his administration had represented in terms of a policy of economic development. So you have a history in Europe, especially in Bismarck's Germany, in which the exact copy of the intention of policy making in Germany was the same as that essentially of the United States in the same period. But in general, Europe does not presently have any of the attributes of the better days of Europe in past times. That is, the 20th century in particular, than the current century. So it's a weak system. Now there in Europe, including the United Kingdom, there is a push, a commitment for Glass-Steagall. In many cases, they don't know what they're talking about but in a number of cases of leading people, they do, including certain bankers and so forth, have made it very clear. They understand exactly what Glass-Steagall means in a practical application. That is being weakened now, and there's no hope of any initiative from Europe now, from the governments now. But what we have is, if the United States proceeds to act contrary to Obama, proceeds to act for Glass-Steagall in the United States, not only will that decision cause a sudden surge of return of the United States to its historic role, because that's what Glass-Steagall will do. And at the same time, Glass-Steagall being passed in the United States would be probably picked up outside the United States itself by other countries. They would be encouraged. For example, we have cases in Britain, cases in other parts of Europe, where significant numbers of people would support Glass-Steagall and understand more or less accurately what they mean by doing that and what their proposals are competent. So we are in a situation now that the overall pattern of what we can deduce is, if we in the United States, once we in the United States have put through Glass-Steagall in the United States again, you will find immediately a sudden turn within parts of Europe who will turn to Glass-Steagall as the obvious solution for their problems. And that's the way we have to look at it.
All right, so I'd like to present the final question of the broadcast. And this question reflects the organizing that we've been doing in the United States, leading into this week of action. Coming this week, we have days of action planned already in New Jersey, in the capitals, in Trenton, in Houston, Texas, in Boston, Massachusetts, in Sacramento, California. We'll be having days of action at those capitals in conjunction with a major dissent from the LaRouche PAC and our activists up and down the East Coast and from a few other places on Washington, D.C., on members of Congress. And this is intended not just as a quantitative increase, an increase in the number of activists, but a qualitative increase because of the depth of the crisis and also the depth of understanding that's being developed among our quantitatively increasing activist base. But this week already we had the unanimous consent to pass the Glass-Steagall resolution in the Alabama State House. There's going to be a big fight in the Senate, I believe, on Tuesday. So that fight is still not won, but it's certainly winnable in Alabama. In Louisiana, we had the introduction of the Glass-Steagall resolution, which brings the total number of states with resolutions introduced up to 18. And we're expanding our deployments across the country into more states where we currently do not have activity. So we can, again, expect that to expand. The voices calling for Glass-Steagall are bipartisan. They cross parties at every level of government and institutions that we're seeing. There was recently a press conference at the American Enterprise Institute with Ted Kaufman, former senator from Delaware, and the FDIC Vice Chairman Thomas Honig, who were both speaking specifically in the case of Kaufman about Glass-Steagall bank separation, and in the case of Thomas Honig presenting a very clear-cut case of why we must have complete separation by function, not by size, and that unless steps are taken soon, a new bailout, a new financial crisis are inevitable. And in addition to that, the former head of the Office of Management and Budget, David Stockman, is continuing his book tour where he has previously and continues to call for a super Glass-Steagall bank separation. So as that continues, what we're getting from more from our activist base is major concerns about the future of the country as they're acting to bring about a fundamental change in the way the United States economy is organized, bringing about a Glass-Steagall system. There are concerns about the future. Younger people asking, how am I going to get an education when I'm working an under the table job, when everything has been taken away from me? What can I do to fight for my own future? Older people expressing their concerns about their grandchildren. You know, older people with 4, 8, 12, 16 grandchildren. They're saying, what kind of future? How do I bring about a future for these grandchildren? So the fundamental question has been, what can I do? And we've taken to this theme in the organizing for this week of action that we are a city upon a hill, as the great John Winthrop said, as the great John F. Kennedy, another native-born of Massachusetts, well, Winthrop wasn't native-born, but quoted Winthrop saying in 1961 as he embarked on his presidency, we must always consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. And in that speech, Kennedy continued, today the eyes of all people are truly upon us, and our governments, in every branch, at every level, national, state, and local, must be as a city upon a hill, constructed and inhabited by men aware of their great trust and their great responsibilities. So today, I can proudly report that the activities at the city level, the county level, the state level, and increasingly the federal level, we are getting this response that we shall be these individuals taking hold of this responsibility. But the question to pose to you, because you've recruited now multiple generations of a LaRouche organization, a LaRouche PAC organization, the question that you've gotten more times than I can even imagine, what do we do? How do we amplify our efforts? What do we need to know? What do we need to put into action? That's a question.
Very simple. I go back to a certain day, in a certain Sunday in New York City. At the time, we were about to go to war with Japan and other countries. And if you go back to that and know what I experienced at those moments, there was a certain shock effect in that Sunday morning. And then as the noontime approached and we went into the afternoon, there was a surge of mass voluntary recruitment to military service of the United States under this, what had happened in Hawaii. That the way this can happen, as in war, but not just in war, that there come times when a sudden shock tests a people for their ability to function and meet their responsibilities, not only to their own generation, but to coming generations. We, in my generation, did that, and then on Pearl Harbor Day. We continued it. We won, despite the British ally. The British ally, Winston Churchill, kept postponing the decisive war on Europe, trying to bring up other kinds of diversionary wars and diversionary operations again and again and again. So what happened is the British kept stalling on the invasion of Europe, the Great Invasion, to wait until Franklin Roosevelt, who was dying, died. And we never had a chance, really, to express what our intention had been in war. Our intention had been to get the job done quickly and to save civilization. We did the first a little bit. We did that job. But we didn't do the job that Franklin Roosevelt had specified as the victory, which we had to secure for mankind. We're now again at the same point. Our people are desperate, more desperate than they were back in the times of Pearl Harbor incident. And what we have to do is recognize that in our people, there are a significant number of people who will respond with little urging, as many people responded in New York City and elsewhere on Pearl Harbor Day. And we must think of that not only for warfare, we must mobilize in that way now for the winning of a necessary peace, a peace of mankind based on Glass-Steagall.
Well, that brings a conclusion to our webcast. Your marching orders are available on the LaRouche PAC website under the National Call to Action, and I encourage everybody to study that and activate yourself to the maximum level with our marching orders for next week, the week of action for Glass-Steagall. I'd like to thank Leandra and Jason for joining me here in the studio today, and I'd like to thank you, Lynn, for being on with us from Europe. And we look forward to the opportunity to getting to do this again. So thank you very much, and stay tuned to LaRouche PAC TV.